that's how I got into this whole thing about writing novels. Now, when I first started writing, I realized a very significant thing. Didn't know how to write. That can hinder you from writing a novel. So I was always a good storyteller, but the writing thing had eluded me. So I started taking classes at the UW Extension to learn how to write, to hone my skills so that I could write something presentable for you guys to read, mostly for myself, because I just loved my stories and wanted to tell them and wanted to have somebody else be able to access them. So that's how I got into this whole thing, and like I said, I wanted to write something that I wanted to read, so I wrote love stories. It didn't exactly get into the nitty-gritty of what was happening in the people's bedrooms, but didn't keep you so far away that you couldn't imagine that they actually could get to the bedroom, So, because I read some of the Christian romance novels, and I'm like, what? How did that happen? And it just never, there was nothing between them that made them fall in love that I could see. And so that was a little frustrating, so I thought I'd write something in between. And then I chose, I'm not exactly sure why I chose interracial novels and dating. I, had a little experience with that when I was in college, so John, close your ears. That's my lovely husband back there. And so I just think I found it interesting and wanted to explore it. And then I picked the time period, 1969 is when most of the stuff happens in both novels. I wanted it still to be difficult for them to be in a relationship, and I wanted young people to be able to read about a time when, oh, you mean I just can't walk up to somebody who's a different race and say, hey, you want to be my girlfriend, or hey, you want to hang out, you want to be my boo? I wanted them to experience, and for myself, a time when that would have been difficult to do when you're crossing a lot of lines to get there. So that's how I got here. Love changes, as Chris so eloquently explained, and now Love Dreams. Love Dreams picks up where Love Changes left off. James is Shelley's cast off. He's the man she didn't choose. And there's nothing wrong with James, let me tell you. James is a wonderful man, and so he's questioning, how did this happen? And he's a little bitter over it. He's thinking, why'd she choose a white man over me? So he's, he's got his own story to tell. But then enter Kimberly. And what is she doing on the south side of Chicago? She could live anywhere. She's a wealthy white woman, and he's really kind of surprised, and his friend is kind of surprised. But they find her curious and interesting, and then they eventually have to explore their own relationship, which brings up a lot of angst for him and a lot of, is this really what I should be doing? So I'm going to take you to a place in the book, chapter 3. It's called The Trouble with James. If you have your book and you'd like to read along, it's 27. If not, don't worry, I'll read it to you with all the expression that I can muster at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. So here we are picking up with James after being dropped by Shelley. And so Shelley has had her second wedding ceremony. She's come back to the neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, and she's marrying Mark again because she wants to do it in the church. And so James goes to the wedding because he's like, I'm not going to be sitting around here having everybody feeling sorry for me, thinking that I can't make it to this wedding. I'm going to the wedding. But after the wedding, he goes to see the all-wise Mama Rose because, she's got all the answers. Everybody in the neighborhood loves her. She's the grandmother who moved in next to Jake Schultz, the very bigoted father of Mark Schultz. And so he's coming to her house. She was almost his mother-in-law or grandmother-in-law. And he's coming to speak with her about what's really going on. And so this is Mama Rose starting out talking, a conversation between her and James. Sit down, boy. What's your trouble? Holding his jacket on his arms, James stepped over a basket filled with pies, fruits, homemade crocheting, and other sundry goods laid in offering to the Reverend Mother. He couldn't think of anything he wanted to do less than visit with Rose today, but he needed some answers. Since he couldn't get them from Shelley, her grandmother would have to do. He laid his coat across the back of his chair and collapsed into the garishly red sofa, inadvertently stroking the plush velvet beneath his thumb. She hadn't yet removed the plastic from the companion chairs, which were thankfully muted by the tanned flower pattern meandering through them. It was all new, a celebration to her return to the neighborhood. My trouble, he grunted, turning his head in the general direction of the Schultz's next-door home. Jake Schultz was Shelley's new father-in-law. The whole scene made James sick. Mama Rose stared into his eyes as if she could read the weariness of her would-be grandson-in-law. He crossed his legs and tried to drown out thoughts of Shelley by filling his lungs with the sweet smell of fresh cornbread baking not 10 feet from him. I still like books. Rose had moved back only a month ago, but the entire neighborhood was sizzling. Their matriarch had returned. It was amazing, really. Who else could stir such passion after being gone a decade? Passion. Shelley. Betrayal. If you can't figure out what my trouble is, Miss Rose, you've lost your powers of clairvoyance, James spat toward the wise gray brown-eyed woman sitting across from him. My powers of what? Boy, don't be cursing me and don't be snarling at me either. James cut his eyes to a respectable stare as Mama Rose cautioned, pointing her all-knowing finger at his nose. I ain't got no powers of Claire, whatever you said. All my understanding come from the Lord. Although it's rumored that I know everything, her lips curled into a gentle smile as her strong brown hand gave him a pat. I only know the thing God gives me to know. And that's Mama Rose to you, Mr. J.J. Smarts. Her plastic-covered chair squeaked as she got up to get a simmering cup of weak tea and a pat of oleo-slathered cornbread, his favorites. He watched the deep bronze and milky white of the tea twist and turn into a creamy tan. His nose twitched at the bread's sweet aroma. Mama Rose, why do you call me that? He edged, angry he had stuffed his mouth full of bread without thinking. You know I prefer James, not Jimmy Smart, and not JJ, and certainly not JJ Smarts, he swallowed hungrily, trying to clear his throat. I've worked hard to be respectable. I'm professional, conscientious, church-going. Church-going, Mama Rose interrupted her own swallow of tea and narrowed her eyes. May I continue? Don't let me stop you. Her hands were now on her hips. Where was I? Oh yes, church-going. He gave her time for a rebuttal. There was none. I contribute to the community, both with finances and deeds. I'm mannerable and modest. Mama Rose supplied with a smirk. Yes, modest, he wanted to strangle her, and I'm a decent-looking man. Now that's an under. What's that, Mama? Your voice went quiet. Yes, James, you're most of that, but you're so straight. I don't get you. You're stiff, boy, like a board. She was up collecting dishes and taking them to the kitchen. Oh, he laughed, a cynical chortle. So that's why she chose Schultz. He's more flexible, more fun. I thought it was because he's white.